David Letterman's hand froze in midair. Paul Schaefer's fingers lifted off the piano key. The band stopped playing. 200 people in Studio 6A went completely silent. Sitting across from Dave was Sammy Davis Jr., Mr. Entertainment, the greatest all-around performer in show business history, one-third of the Rat Pack. And right now, on this March night in 1985, Sammy was removing his glass eye on live television. His hands were shaking, his voice was breaking, and what he was about to confess would expose the darkest secret of the golden age of Hollywood, a secret about pain, about racism, about the price of making white America comfortable. This moment would never be shown again. March 7, 1985. Studio 6A at Rockefeller Center, New York City. Late Night with David Letterman was in its prime, the hottest show on television for anyone under 40. The wood-paneled studio glowed under warm tungsten light. The retro desk sat center stage. Paul Schaefer's keyboard gleamed. The Manhattan skyline sparkled through tall windows. David Letterman, 37 years old, sat behind his desk with his signature gap-toothed grin, shuffling blue index cards. His curly brown hair was perfectly disheveled. His tie hung loose. Tonight, he was excited, really excited. Tonight's guest was a living legend, Sammy Davis Jr. The booking had been easy. Sammy loved doing talk shows. At 59, he'd been performing for 56 years, since he was 3 years old. He danced with his father in Vaughan, sung with Frank Sinatra, acted in movies, starred on Broadway. He could sing, dance, act, do impressions, play instruments, and make an audience love him within 30 seconds. He was, simply put, the most talented entertainer alive. But he was also dying, though nobody knew it yet. The throat cancer that would kill him in 5 years was already growing. And tonight, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, Sammy had decided to tell the truth about something he'd hidden for 40 years. The monologue went perfect. Dave crushed with jokes about Ed McMahon and the weather. The audience loved. Paul's band was cooked. Everything was clicked. Then came the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dave said, his voice full of genuine reverence, "my next guest has been called the greatest entertainer in the world. He's done it all: movies, television, Broadway, Vegas, you name it. He's Mr. Entertainment himself. Please welcome Sammy Davis Jr." The audience exploded. Standing ovation before Sammy even appeared. This was royal. This was his. Paul's band launched in The Candyman. The curtain pulled back, and Sammy Davis Jr. bounded out. Even at 59, even with his body starting to fail, Sammy moved like electricity. He danced a few steps, spun one, hit a pose. The audience went wild. He wore a black tuxedo with a white shirt, bow tie, and his signature gold jewelry. His face, that incredible, expressive face, beamed with joy. The glass eye in his left socket looked nearly identical to his real right eye. Most people never noticed. Dave stood, and Sammy embraced him warmly. Sammy embraced everyone. It was part of his thing. Love everybody. Make everybody feel special. He sat in the guest chair with energy buzzing around him like an electric field. "Sammy, thank you for being here," Dave said. "David, baby, anywhere you want me, I'm there." That voice raspy, warm, uniquely Sammy. They talked about Vegas, about the Rat Pack, about working with Frank and Dean. Sammy told hilarious stories, did impressions, had the audience in the palm of his hand. This was what Sammy did. He performed. He made you love. He made you forget everything else. But then Dave asked a question that changed everything. "Sammy, you've been performing since you were a child. You've seen done everything. What was the hardest moment of your career?" It was meant to be a softball, an invitation for a funny story, or a humble brag. But something shifted in Sammy's face. The performer disappeared. What remained was a tired man carrying something heavy. "You really want to know, David?" Sammy's voice was different, quiet, serious. "Of course." Sammy looked at the audience, then at the camera, then back at Dave. "Can I tell you something I've never said publicly? Something real?" Dave leaned forward. "Always." Sammy took a breath. His hand went to his left eye. The glass. "November 19th, 1954. I was in a car accident. Lost this eye." He tapped the glass eye gently. "Everyone knows that story. It's in all the biographies." The audience was quiet now, sensing something. "But what they don't know is why I was driving that night, where I was going, what I was running from." What Sammy Davis Jr. said next would expose the ugliest truth about Hollywood's golden age. "I was driving from Vegas to LA," Sammy said, his voice steady but pain underneath. 3 in the morning, driving fast, too fast, and I hit another car head-on." He paused. "The accident report says the other driver walked away with minor injuries, and that's true. But what the report doesn't say is that the other driver was white, and I was black. And this was 1954 in California." The studio went very quiet. When the police came, they saw a black man in an expensive car. They saw a white family with a damaged vehicle, and they made a decision. Sammy's jaw tightened. "They were going to arrest me, charge me with reckless endangerment, maybe worse. My career would be over. I'd be another Negro who got too big for his britches and paid the price." Dave's face had gone pale. This wasn't the fun Sammy Davis Jr. story anyone expected. "But then one of the cops recognized me. He'd seen me perform in Vegas. He was a fan, and he made me a deal. Sammy looked directly at Dave. He said, Sammy, this is bad, real bad, but I can make it go away. I can write it up as your fault. Single vehicle act, no other parties involved. But you gotta give me something. A woman in the audience started crying, already knowing where this was going. I said, anything. What do you want? Money? Ticket? And he said, I want you to lose the eye. The studio gasped. Actually gasped. He said the White family would want to see me punished. But if I lost my eye, if there was visible, permanent damage, they'd feel satisfied. They'd see that God or karma or whatever had already punished, and they'd let it go. Sammy's hand trembled as he touched his glass eye again. So the cop, that fan, he took me to the hospital, and he told the doctors that my eye was so badly damaged it couldn't be saved. He convinced them to remove it, and then he wrote up the accident report as single vehicle, just Sammy Davis Jr. driving too fast and hitting a pole. Tears were streaming down Sammy's face now. But I didn't hit a pole, David. I hit a family, and I lost my eye not because of the act, but because a cop thought it would make white people feel better about letting me go free. The audience was stunned into silence. Paul Schaefer sat frozen at his keyboard. Dave looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Why were you driving so fast at night? Dave asked quietly. Where were you going? Sammy's face crumpled completely. I was running from a hotel in Vegas, the Sands, where I'd just been told I couldn't use the front entrance anymore, where they just explained that I could perform for white audience, but I couldn't eat in their restaurants or swim in their pools or stay in their room. His voice broke. Frank Sinatra was headlining that week. After the show, Frank invited me to join him at the casino, and the pit boss pulled me aside and said, you can't be in here. Frank heard it and lost his mind, started screaming at the boss, threatening to quit, causing a scene, and I stood there, smiling, pretending it didn't hurt, because that's what I always did. That's what I had to do. And then Sammy did something that would haunt everyone watching. Sammy reached up with both hands, and slowly, carefully, he removed his glass eye. The audience gasped again. Some people looked away, but Sammy held the glass eye up for everyone to see. This, he said, his voice raw, is what it cost to be a black entertainer in the 1950s. This is what I traded for my career. My eye for permission to make white people laugh. He looked at the camera, the empty socket visible, the glass eye in his palm. You know what the hardest part is? Everyone tells me I'm lucky to have survived. Lucky the accident wasn't worse. Lucky to still have a career. And I smile and say yes, I'm lucky because that's what I'm supposed to do. He put the glass eye back in, his hand shake. But the truth is, I gave up a piece of myself, literally gave up a piece of myself so white America wouldn't be uncomfortable with a successful black man. And I've been pretending it was an accident for 31 years. Dave stood up without thinking, walked around his desk, and this time, instead of sitting beside the guest, he knelt down, right there on the stage floor. So he was looking up at Sammy instead of down. Sammy, Dave said, his own voice shaking, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that happened. I'm so sorry you've had to carry that alone. Sammy looked down at this young white man kneeling before him, and something broke open. You want to know the worst part, David? The absolute worst part? Tell me. I still love performing for white audience. I still get excited when they applaud. I still want their approval. Even after everything they've done to me, everything they've taken from me, I still want them to love me. He started sobbing. Full body shaking sob. What does that make me? What kind of man needs love from people who demanded his eye as payment for their comfort? Dave didn't answer. He just stayed there, kneeling present. Paul Schaefer began to play. Softly, What Kind of Fool Am I? One of Sammy's signature songs, but played like a funeral dirge, like a prayer for broken things. The audience was devastated. Crew members were crying. The camera operators kept filming because nobody had the guts to cut away. And then something happened that nobody expected. A man stood up from the audience. He was maybe 70 years old, white, wearing a suit. He walked down the aisle slowly. Security moved to intercept, but Sammy held up his hand. Let him come! The man walked right up to Sam, stood in front of him, and said, Mr. Davis, my name is Robert Mitchell. I was the police officer who took you to the hospital that night. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change everything anyone thought they knew about forgiveness. The studio went dead silent. Sammy stared at this man, at the cop who'd cost him his eye. I've lived with what I did for 31 years. Robert Mitchell said, his voice shaking. I've watched you perform. I've seen your success, and I've wanted to apologize every single day. Sammy stood up slowly. Dave moved aside, giving them space. I thought I was helping, Mitchell continued. I thought I was saving your career, but I was wrong. I was a coward who went along with a racist system, and I cost you your eye to protect myself from having to fight that system. Tears were streaming down his face. I came here tonight because my grandson told me you were going to be on, and I thought maybe, after all these years, I could finally say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sammy looked at this old man, this cop who'd taken his eye, this man who'd enforced the rules of a world that saw Sammy as less than human. And Sammy did something nobody expected. He embraced him, a full embrace, holding this man who'd hurt, choosing connection over rage. "I forgive you," Sammy whispered. "God help me, I forgive you." Mitchell collapsed into the embrace, sobbing like a child. Two men, one black, one white, one performer, one cop, holding on to each other through decades of pain. The audience was openly weeping. Dave was crying. Paul was crying. The whole studio was witnessing something sacred. When they finally separated, Sammy looked at the camera, at America watch. "This is what they don't tell you about being black in America," he said, his voice steady now. "They don't tell you that you'll have to forgive people who don't deserve it. They don't tell you that you'll have to smile through pain because your survival depends on white comfort. They don't tell you that you'll trade pieces of yourself, literally trade pieces of yourself, for permission to exist." He gestured to Mitchell, still standing beside him. "This man took my eye, and I just forgave him. Not because he earned, but because I'm tired of carrying the weight. Tired of pretending it doesn't hurt. Tired of being everybody's favorite Negro who never complained." His voice rose. "I'm complaining now. I'm saying it hurt. I'm saying it's not fair. I'm saying that black entertainers have been paying for white comfort with our body, our dignity, our sanity for generations, and it needs to stop." The audience erupted. Not just applause, something deep, recognition, witness, the sound of people finally hearing what had always been said but never listened. Sammy turned to Robert Mitchell. "You came here to apologize, and I accept your apology, but more than that, I need you to do something for me. Anything." Mitchell said, "Tell people. Tell them what really happened. Tell them about the system you were part of. Tell them so maybe the next black performer doesn't have to trade their eye for permission to succeed." Mitchell nodded, unable to speak. Dave stepped forward. "We're going to take a break, but we'll be right back." They cut to commercial, but nobody moved. Sammy and Mitchell stood together, talking quietly. Dave hovered nearby, protecting the space. When they came back from commercial, Dave had 3 chairs arranged. Him, Sammy, and Robert Mitchell, like equals, like witnesses to the same painful history. For the next 20 minutes, they just talked about race, about entertainment, about the cost of success in a country built on inequality. Sammy told stories about performing in the South, about hotels that wouldn't let him stay but wanted him to perform, about restaurants that fed him in the kitchen, about swimming pools that drained after he used. Mitchell talked about being a cop in the 1950s, about the unwritten rule, about how the system crushed anyone who challenged, black or white. And Dave listened, asked questions, created space for truth. And what happened after that night would change Sammy's final years forever. NBC executives were horrified. "Too controversial," they said. "Too racial. Too real." They never aired the episode again. They tried to bury, but you can't bury truth. Sammy Davis Jr. went home that night and called everyone he'd ever wanted to be honest with, his ex-wife, his children, his friends from the Rat Pack, and he told them the truth about the eye, about the cost, about the pain he'd been hiding. Robert Mitchell wrote an op-ed for the New York Times titled, "I was the cop who took Sammy Davis Jr.'s side." He detailed the systemic racism of law enforcement, the unwritten rule, the ways the system punished black success. The op-ed caused a fire. Some people called Mitchell a hero for coming forward. Others called him a monster for what he'd done. But the conversation had started about race, about entertainment, about the invisible prices paid by black performers. Sammy Davis Jr. lived 5 more years, and in those 5 years, he became an advocate. He spoke openly about racism in entertainment. He refused to perform at venues that discriminate. He used his platform for truth instead of just performance. In 1989, Sammy was diagnosed with throat cancer. He knew it was terminal, and he asked for one final interview with David Letterman. Dave flew to LA, sat at Sammy's bedside. No camera, no audience, just 2 men who'd shared something sacred. "Thank you," Sammy whispered, his voice almost gone from the cancer. "For what?" Dave asked. "For letting me tell the truth, for giving me space to stop performing and start existing." Dave held Sammy's hand. "Thank you for trusting me with it. That night changed my life," Sammy said. "I'd spent 56 years entertaining, and in 30 minutes on your show, I finally got to be real." Sammy died 3 weeks later. At his funeral, Robert Mitchell spoke. He told the story of that night in 1954. He told the truth about taking Sammy's eye, and he dedicated the rest of his life to racial justice work. Dave Letterman spoke at the funeral too. He said, "Sammy Davis Jr. was the greatest entertainer I ever met. But more than that, he was the brave, because he chose honesty over image. He chose truth over comfort. And he showed America that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the pain forward and using it to create change." The legacy of that night isn't about celebrity interviews or television moments. It's about the invisible costs of success for people of color. The ways the system demands pieces of them, their dignity, their comfort, sometimes their bodies, in exchange for permission to exist in white space. Sammy Davis Jr. gave his eye. Others have given more. And America has too often looked away, preferring the performance to the person. That night in 1985, Sammy stopped performing. He stopped making white America comfortable. He told told the truth. And it cost him everything NBC wanted from him: the fun, the laughter, the easy entertainment. But it gave him something more valuable: his dignity, his truth, his humanity. And somewhere in the archive of moments that changed television, there's a recording of Sammy Davis Jr. removing his glass eye on live television and saying, "This is what it cost." That recording should be required viewing for every entertainer, every cop, every person who's ever benefited from a system built on someone else's pain. Because we can't fix what we won't acknowledge, and we can't heal what we pretend doesn't hurt. Sammy Davis Jr. spent 56 years making people laugh, and in 30 minutes, he made them see, really see, the cost of their comfort, the price of their entertainment, the eye he traded so they could love him without discomfort. That's the legacy. Not the performance, not the award, not the applause, but the truth. Raw, painful, necessary. The truth that even the greatest entertainer in the world was just a man trying to survive in a country that saw him as less than human. And the choice he made to stop performing and start testifying, to stop making white America comfortable and start making them accountable. That's what mattered. That's what changed everything. That's what we should never forget.